Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever wondered why the world's oceans are rapidly running out of fish, even though they're just so incredibly vast and resource-rich? Today, we're going to dive into a classic puzzle that has completely baffled scientists and economists for decades. It's called the overfishing paradox. To make sense of the whole shebang, we're going to build our understanding step by step, almost like baking a layered cake. Here's our agenda for today. 1. The overfishing paradox. 2. The biology of fish. 3. Chasing maximum sustainable yield. 4. The economic plot twist. And 5. The open access trap. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The overfishing paradox.
Back in 1954, an economist named H. Scott Gordon noticed something kind of baffling. He pointed out that while ocean resources are incredibly rich, fishermen themselves seldom earn more than a meager income. Gordon realized that just pointing the finger at biological depletion didn't fully explain why fishermen were comparatively so poor, especially when he looked at workers in other renewable resource industries, like agriculture. There was clearly something else going on beneath the surface.
It really begs the question, right? If the oceans are so incredibly rich, why are the fish disappearing and why aren't the fishermen wealthy? It's a brilliant paradox, and it forces us to ask why what actually happens out there on the water is so vastly different from what is biologically and economically optimal.
Section 2. The biology of fish. Okay, so to solve Gordon's paradox, we first have to lay down layer 1 of our cake, the biological reality of how a fish population actually grows over time. Notice the distinct S shape of the logistic growth curve. It perfectly captures population dynamics. At very low levels, the fish population multiplies pretty slowly. Then, as it gets a bit bigger, boom, the growth rate rapidly accelerates. But eventually, as those fish start fiercely competing for a limited food supply, that growth rate completely flatlines. That flat line at the top introduces a super important concept: carrying capacity. It's the maximum population size, or biomass, that an ecosystem can naturally sustain. Basically, if we just leave the marine resource alone, it's going to grow until it hits this absolute limit. The ecosystem essentially puts up a no vacancy sign and the population stabilizes.
Section 3. Chasing maximum sustainable yield. So, nature finds its balance, but let's look at what happens when humans enter the picture and actively try to extract the absolute maximum amount of food possible from the ocean. The management concept we often rely on here is called maximum sustainable yield, or MSY for short. It's the highest harvest you can take from the resource on a continuous, sustainable basis without reducing its long-term stock. Honestly, think of it exactly like a bank account. If you only would draw the newly generated interest, meaning the new fish born that year, the principal, biological stock, remains completely untouched and it's totally ready to generate more interest next year.
You can visualize this brilliantly through the famous Schaefer model. Notice how the maximum sustainable yield sits right at the very peak of that parabola. That peak is the exact point where the growth rate of the fish resource is at its absolute highest, usually around half of the carrying capacity. In theory, if you constantly harvest right at this peak, you get the maximum amount of fish forever. Sounds perfect, right? Well, reality is rarely that clean and predictable. Managing a fishery purely based on this biological peak is incredibly risky. For one, fisheries face random, unpredictable environmental shocks. On top of that, our measurements of underwater fish biomass are, frankly, highly prone to error. If you aim for the absolute peak and slightly overestimate the stock, you can accidentally plunge the population into a rapid decline. Plus, and this is a really big one, maximizing the catch simply does not maximize the net economic return. Which brings us to Section 4. The economic plot twist.
This is layer 2 of our cake. This is where H. Scott Gordon overlaid economics onto the underlying biology and discovered a major, game-changing plot twist. Here's the kicker. Maximum sustainable yield absolutely does not equal maximum economic yield. Getting the most fish biologically simply doesn't mean making the most profit economically. I know, this runs entirely counter to what most of us assume. You'd think catching more fish automatically equals making more money, but mathematically, it just doesn't. Let's see why.
When we look at the Gordon-Schaefer model, the economics of fishing become perfectly clear. The vertical distance between the curved total revenue line and the straight total cost line, that's your profit. The maximum profit, the maximum economic yield, actually occurs to the left of the biological peak. Why? Because it requires keeping a higher fish biomass in the water. Think about it. It fundamentally costs way less fuel, time, and effort to catch fish when the ocean is literally packed with them. Fish don't just magically jump into your boat. You actually have to spend money to find them. So that leaves us with a huge question. If leaving more fish in the water actually makes fishing significantly more profitable, why do fisheries consistently collapse all around the world? Why don't the fishermen just, stop when they hit that peak profit point? It seems like a total win-win for both biology and economics, doesn't it?
Section 5. The Open Access Trap. The answer to that question lies in the final layer of our cake, the human behavioral trap. And it's caused entirely by the lack of private property rights in the open ocean. This is where human behavior totally derails the neat economic models. When a fishery is sitting at that highly profitable maximum economic yield, the fishermen are making supernormal profits. But because nobody actually owns the ocean, nobody can put up a fence. So those massive profits act like a powerful magnet, and new boats are inevitably going to enter the water to get a piece of the action.
Let's walk through this vicious cycle, which arrives at what economists call the bionomic equilibrium. Step 1. High profits exist. Step 2. Open access immediately attracts new boats. Step 3. All this increased fishing effort relentlessly drives down the fish biomass, making it way harder and much more expensive to catch the remaining fish. And finally, step 4. Profits completely evaporate until total revenue perfectly equals total cost. The extra effort relentlessly drives down the biomass until all that excess profit is completely destroyed for everyone.
This right here is the absolute core of Gordon's 1954 realization. He proved mathematically that because no one owns the ocean, individual fishermen have absolutely zero economic incentive to stop fishing and leave fish behind to reproduce. I mean, if they don't catch it today, the next boat is just going to catch it tomorrow. Economic incentives, when left unchecked, guarantee the overexploitation of shared resources. And hey, this doesn't just apply to fish. It's the exact same dynamic threatening our clean air and global forests. It leads us straight into the classic tragedy of the commons.
So how do we fix it? Well, to prevent this bionomic disaster, management absolutely must aggressively move away from open access. We have to restrict access to the fishery, limit the entry of new vessels, and strictly control the fishing effort of the users already out there. Basically, it requires artificially establishing common property or user rights where none naturally exist.
Which brings us to the ultimate challenge. I really want to leave you with this provocative thought. In a vast, boundaryless ocean, how do we effectively enforce the property rights needed to save both the fish and the fishermen? How do we successfully enforce limits on a resource that fundamentally resists being fenced in? That is the question at the very heart of modern conservation. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll let you chew on that.